Very good afternoon to you all. What we are speaking about today, is the narrative that's been spun of late over the last centuries for that matter, by society as a whole, as far as lawyers are concerned. So let me begin by placing an idea before you. The contempt for money is a trick of the rich to keep the poor from having it. I first heard this from Michael Corleone, the character played by Al Pacino in a deleted scene to the iconic sequel to the already iconic film, The Godfather. It's a powerful thought. Strangely, it's even comforting. Michael Corleone in the film was speaking to a young boy who was perhaps ashamed to admit that he came from wealth, that he came from money. And that's the thing, right? We've been conditioned by society to believe that the rich, the wealthy, the powerful, they are just bad people, deceitful people, people who got by or who got where they got by negotiating deals with their conscience, people who are exploitative, manipulative, who pry on the fears and insecurities of others, people who, well, until the Silicon Valley became relevant, walked around wearing suits, trampling on the rights of others, with their singular goal being personal gain. Now, obviously, you wouldn't put Pablo Escobar and Bill Gates in the same category, would you? They both made money, but there's a difference. Nevertheless, what I want you to do is to take a step back now. Think of the description that I've just given you and answer for yourselves. Of whom, as a class of persons or professionals, does this description also remind you of? That's the point. So, this, my friends, is the effect of what is called subliminal conditioning. Somehow, and subliminal conditioning, by the way, refers to a process in psychology where your mind is conditioned for or against a certain thing, proposition, idea, without you even knowing it. Throw in an element of what is called confirmation bias, which is a description for a process, a cognitive error that our mind commits when it looks for or interprets information in a manner that it validates our pre-existing value systems and beliefs, and you have, let's just say, a stock of warm feelings for us lawyers. These warm feelings, which have been supplemented by decades and years of conditioning through films, television, media, and now even social media. And I might add here, in a few, outrageous, I admit, but few cases, real experiences. You see, what my close to 9 years in this profession have taught me, those 9 years with the 23 years in the world before that, have taught me is that there is a general sense of resentment or contempt towards lawyers, but this degree of resentment or contempt I've seen is either directly proportional to the extent to which a person is non-compliant with or disrespectful of the law, and B, is inversely proportional to the extent to which a person needs legal protection. Now, what this means is that no matter who you are, when the times are good, well, lawyers are the menace. And this isn't necessarily a modern day problem, so to speak, because let's take Shakespeare, for example. The first thing Shakespeare wanted to do is to kill all lawyers. Why? He didn't say why, but he wanted to kill all lawyers. Now, being a lawyer, I'm trained to not just look at the what, but also look for the why behind the what. And when I dug a little deeper, an interesting proposition was repeated in article after article, and that was this. Shakespeare perhaps had these warm feelings towards us as lawyers because lawyers posed a check on the autocracy of his Tudor dynasty masters from the 15th and the 16th century. It's been a while since the 15th and 16th centuries have passed us by. Society in these centuries has changed, has evolved. Economies have changed, economies have evolved. We today don't just deal with business in the sense that it involves trading 5 donkeys for 1 horse or rice for fish. Business, the what and the why behind it, has taken on a whole new meaning. Complete world domination is the order. Technology, transactions which are hidden in structures and layers, the banking system, consumerism, to the point where the average citizen today holds in his or her hands more power, has access to greater resources, and despite all of the everyday struggles, lives in more comfort than the loftiest kings or emperors of the wealthiest empires. Morals have changed, sometimes taking on a meaning which is diametrically opposed to what was back in the day. Laws, so many of which are a living and breathing part of our day-to-day lives, no matter how unmindful and ungrateful we might be for them, have also changed. Take our right to privacy, for example. Take the decision of the Supreme Court in K. Puttaswamy versus the Union of India, which concretized our right to privacy as a fundamental right, overruling various decisions which previously held otherwise. My point is this: the times have changed. The one thing, however, that hasn't changed is the way society subconsciously views lawyers. Gerald Auerbach, a famous historian, puts it beautifully. He says that despite all of the changes and despite all of the progress that civilization has in fact made, the image or conception of the lawyer, even in the 21st century, is rooted in the agrarian and rural image of what is commonly known as a country lawyer, a lot like an Abraham Lincoln of sorts. What I'm trying to say is that even today, when we think of lawyers, the first thing that comes to our mind is a man, yes, that's deliberate, a man with extremely long sideburns, who's vociferous, who's quick-witted, who's perhaps a detective first and a paragon of virtues next, and who tirelessly runs after the moral rights and moral obligation as a whole that society owes to his clients. Anything short of that, well, lawyers were always the problem. Shakespeare said it centuries ago. But consider Cleaver's law, which says that you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. You see, in my argument to defend us lawyers, I don't need judge-made or parliament-made law. Basic laws that govern us, govern physics, govern philosophical laws, are all that I need. Cleaver's law says that you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. Let's park that, come back to it in a bit. Before that, let's consider this one exchange that every newly minted lawyer has been at the opposite end of the moment he or she is qualified to the bar. At least one of 3, I use the number 3 liberally, people that this newly minted lawyer meets are sure to, when they get to know that he or she is now a lawyer, ask or say, "Oh, that's great. Congratulations, you're a lawyer. You know, now I know who to call when I murder someone or when I rob a bank." Some of you lawyers, if there are any, I'm certain have experienced this at some point or the other. Now, obviously, the answer expected of this newly minted lawyer is a thumping yes. I mean, that's what you do, right? As a lawyer, you solve problems. But here's the thing. If this friend does choose to follow through, and provided that the investigating officers, the police officers, have done their jobs satisfactorily, have gathered quality evidence, the answer must be a thumping no. The question then is, would this lawyer be able to get away with saying, no, I can't get you off the hook? The reason lawyers don't say this is because often investigating officers do get lazy. They might fib on the job, they might make honest mistakes on the job, they might even cut deals with their conscience. And so, what a lawyer does is he or she argues before a judge that the evidence that has been gathered by this investigating officer and put before you is not enough to warrant a conclusion of guilt, such as to satisfy the test of reasonable doubt. We don't lie. We just call it for what it is. Reasonable doubt is a legal principle. A legal principle or a standard of proof which is so high that it's based on what is known as the Blackstone formula, which in turn says that it's better to let 10 people free than to let 10 guilty people free than to let one innocent person suffer. It's rooted in societal good or in striking a balance. And it's this very principle of reasonable doubt which gets this friend off the hook who's legally now innocent. All the same, however, what I've seen is that these same people who place such requests are usually the ones standing in solidarity, joining candle marches perhaps, outraging sometimes on their social media and oftentimes on primetime news hour debates, when another person, similarly placed, has been acquitted on the very principle of reasonable doubt. Now, I'm a civil lawyer, so let's consider civil and commercial disputes, something closer to home, which is more of my jam. Consider cases where a party signs a contract which has draconian, absolutely arbitrary and unfair terms. There wasn't a gun to his or her head, but they signed it nevertheless because it promises maybe good money in the short term. And well, the higher the risk, the higher the reward, right? But it's these very people, when those risks finally translate into a calamity, will then use moral arguments to justify which are absolutely unmaintainable claims as far as the law is concerned. And so, my point is this. Maybe the problem lies within us as a society. You see, the thing is that there's moral justice and then there's legal justice. They may often coincide, but legal justice is rooted in societal good. Moral justice usually is A, flexible, and B, stems from a need for self-preservation. And you see, there's nothing wrong with self-preservation itself. In fact, it's our basic instinct as human beings. It's how we've managed to survive and get to the point that we have. But what happens when that instinct for self-preservation and its conflict with preservation of societal interests becomes an excuse for society to pin the blame on us lawyers? And so, just like Michael Corleone, I'm going to let you in on two secrets, two equally important secrets. A, this generalized contempt or resentment towards lawyers is the result of society's inability to reconcile its self-interests with the interests of larger society as a whole, to reconcile our rights with our duties. And then, as a corollary, lawyers in the modern day, in the 21st century, are arguably one of the most mischaracterized and manipulated lot of professionals. Now, like I said, I don't need judge-made or parliament-made law to support this claim. Consider Bohr's law, Niels Bohr, the famous physicist, who said that the crazier the theory, the more likely it is to be true. Or consider what Alan Cohen said, and this is important. He said, you can only see in others what you see in yourself. I think those are powerful words. The point is this. Although people are well aware, and although there's no dispute on the fact that it's us lawyers that society turns to when all else fails, when their liberties are at stake, when their fundamental rights are curtailed, when people who they've put into power to guide their destinies abuse their trust, We as human beings are trained to look for the negative and remember it more than the positives. People have a short memory. And so, this consistent everyday narrative that keeps playing in the background can sometimes cause, if you're a lawyer who's got more black hair than gray, you to think that, or critically consider the impact of your actions. If whether what you're really out to achieve, whether you're able to achieve what you've really set out to achieve, justice. And so, this is what I think the role of lawyers is in the 21st century. Rather, let me put it differently. This is what an eminent jurist of our times has said the role of a lawyer in the 21st century is. The first is, of course, we read law. But equally important is we read human beings and human nature. The law is a vehicle for change, they say. The human beings are the ones who drive it. And so that's the first thing that we do. The second thing is we do the one thing which is so inherent, so fundamental to our existence as human beings, central to our existence as human beings. It's what got Narendra Modi his thumping majority in 2014. It's what put Barack Obama, the first black president of the United States, in the White House. It's what helped Nani Palkhiwala. It's something that Nani Palkhiwala so eloquently mastered when he secured for us our fundamental rights together with 7 judges from the Supreme Court. And he did it so well that Justice H.R. Khanna, if I'm not mistaken, remarked that it was as if God himself was addressing the court. It's what Yuval Noah Harari says has helped sapiens conquer the world. We tell stories. It's only that our stories don't necessarily, at least not always, have dramatic beginnings and dramatic endings, and that our stories are usually coherent, based on facts, logic, rooted in legal principles which are aimed at creating a balance in society, thereby securing for our clients legal justice. What we should do is not tell our clients we'll look into it or that we'll take care of it. We first ought to consider whether the ingredients for our client's story make out a case that can appeal to legal reason. You see, a good doctor, when he or she examines a patient who is critically ill or has been injured, doesn't look at the patient and say, "You'll be fine. You don't need to do anything. I'll take care of it. You'll be fine." The doctor first diagnoses the problem, tells the patient what's wrong with him or her, and then, and only then, proceeds to prescribe the appropriate course of action. Sometimes with irreversible changes. But the patient lives on, and that's the point. Legal justice, not moral justice, is what our job is. So be clear on the kind of justice that you're bound to deliver. And despite all of the narrative, which stems essentially from films, media, and so on and so forth, we create things. If what I'm saying is false, try setting up a manufacturing plant, launching an application without the assistance of lawyers. So we do create things. Last, and perhaps most important, when all else fails, we do stand up for the rights of others. We do provide you with the last bastion of hope, sometimes even facing incarceration against tyrannies and oppressive governments, a lot like an emergency service. See what I did there? That is the role of a lawyer in the 21st century. But I also said that this was something one of the most eminent jurists of our time has said this. Scratch that. But Coleman's law says that people are more likely to believe what you say if you say that Benjamin Franklin or someone of the like said it first. So the next time you come across respectable members of society passing judgment on what lawyers do, politely, albeit, remember this afternoon, chuckle at them, and wait for them to ask you. That's great. Now you can represent me in my murder trial or when I commit a bank robbery. Oh, and I almost forgot. While you're at it, while you're out there dispensing legal justice, telling stories, weaving substantive law with procedural law. Don't be afraid to go after some money the right way. Because you remember, Michael Corleone said, the contempt of money is a trick of the rich to keep the poor from having it. I'm Aman. Thank you.